ever wondered what the differences are between folklore, legends, and mythology? Or why are they so important in societies? Or who is this devilishly handsome man, and why does he look like he's about to talk nonstop for the next 10 minutes? Let's find out as we open the book and learn more on the myth, the legend, the series. Oh my god, I can't believe I'm finally starting my first channel! Okay, we can geek out about this later. Hello, everyone. I am your host, Jonathan Lawton, and today on the premiere of The Myth, the Legend, the series, we will be talking about the differences in some of the major form of storytelling and why they are important to society in the past, present, and future. Folklore, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is the traditional beliefs, customs, and stories of a community passed through the generations orally. Think of it as some sort of cultural DNA where it embodies itself in the art, stories, knowledge, and practices of a group. A famous folklorist, Alan Dundee, explained in an essay he wrote back in 1965, What is Folklore?, that the term folk referred to the common people, or groups, who share at least one common factor. It didn't matter what the linking factor was, whether it was a common occupation, language, religion, or even if they were all part of the same nerd fandom. As long as they had some traditions they could call theirs, they had the ability to create folklore. Folklore can be a multitude of things. For example, cryptozoology, legends, holiday, memes, stories about the supernatural local to the area. The list could go on and on. It can also be found in everyday things like water cooler jokes at work, or home with a family's recipe box, or even emojis. As long as it can find some form of meaning within a group, it can be folklore. Folklore can sometimes be referred to as the umbrella term encompassing all traditional stories, beliefs, and practices of a culture, including fairy tales, legends, and myths. Folk tales describe how the main character copes with the events of everyday life and will teach lessons on how to deal with, well, everything. Sometimes they are put into fantasy settings, and that is when we get fairy tales. Fairy tales are short stories that typically feature magical creatures and settings that have a clear distinction between good and evil, and they also teach moral lessons. They weren't always the Disney money-making, light and fluffy, power of friendship story that we show kids today. That is an idea that started in the 1800s. No, earlier fairy tales were much more gruesome and dark and were generally seen as adult entertainment. But that's a story for another episode. With that being said, folklore isn't the only type of cultural storytelling. Next up, we have legends. According to Oxford Language, legends are traditional stories sometimes popularly regarded as historical but unauthenticated. Legends are about specific people or events that have been changed to fit a narrative. They take heroes and conflicts from history and alter them to best portray a culture's values and morals. They can often bring a community together when there is a ritual or celebration attached to a legend. Legends like King Arthur or Robin Hood are incredibly famous due to the fact that they chose a real time in history and created characters that had higher moral grounds and were often seen as the good guys in their stories. They were used as symbols in society to teach values and create a sense of belonging for the audience. Much of early literature were legends known as epic poems, which were told over and over again before they were eventually written down. Stories such as Beowulf, the Odyssey, Gilgamesh, Sleepy Hollow, and so many more are classic examples of legends. A common trend we see with legends is that they are often episodic, taking the same characters and putting them in different scenarios to go on some epic quest, learn a lesson, and show off their true nature with what it meant to be who they were based on the values they had. The best way to see if you are looking at a legend is when you are reading or listening to it for the first time and you think to yourself, is this true? Due to their nature of being pulled from history, if you can read a story about an event or a person who displays the best parts of their culture and think, wow, they are a great person who did all of these things, or whoa, that was some crazy event Eleanor Roosevelt had to go through, then find out later, only to find out that they didn't exist or that never actually happened, it was just based on what happened, then congratulations, you found an example of a legend. But so far, we have only gone over stories covering the questions of who are we and how should we do it. The bigger questions, like what is the meaning of life, why were humans and the earth created, and how, and why is the sun constantly running from the moon? The list could go on and on. Those are covered in myths. Oxford Dictionary defines myth as a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. Myths are sacred tales that explain the natural world, human experience, and answer the timeless questions that keep me up at 4 in the morning. All myths can teach and guide people through life, regardless of when it was written. They are just as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. Mythology comes from the Greek word mythos, meaning story, sometimes known as story of the people, and logos, meaning speech or word. This is because when myths were being created, they were told orally over and over again to preserve the story until someone had the bright idea to finally write it down. Myths have a wide variety of topics like the origin of the world, the afterlife, and natural events such as the seasons changing and storms. The cool things about myths are the fact that they transcend cultures due to the fact that everyone has their own version of the story. In The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell in 1949, he coined the term monomyth, which is a term he used to describe the similarities in themes, characters, purpose, and narrative progression of myths from different cultures at different times around the world. Examples are things like a great flood or afterlives. While myths are vast and hard to categorize, they have been able to be boiled down into three groups: ideological, historical, and psychological. Ideological myths derive itself from the Greek word "aetion", meaning reason. They are the origin stories that explain everything in the natural world. Things like Hades kidnapping slash marrying Persephone, pissing off her mom, Demeter, so much that she just stops all spring for 6 months while waiting for her daughter to come back. Or the moon and the sun are siblings, constantly trying to kill each other, so they run around the earth, causing night and day. Or the reason why we have 365 days is because the god of knowledge, Thoth, played a game with Ra to allow a baby to be born. Just the casual things. Historical myths are a lot like legends, where they retell an event and give it a higher purpose than just what happened. Literally, the entire Trojan War and its aftermath from both the Greek and Roman perspectives are example of these historical myths. Finally, we have psychological myths, which takes a protagonist on a journey from the known to the unknown. Campbell said that these stories represent a psychological need to balance the external world with one's internal consciousness of it. He also made a subcategory for these myths called the hero's journey, where the protagonist goes through roughly a 12-step process until they find out who they really are and are able to right a terrible wrong to reestablish order. Psychological myths include literally any Greek hero, Oedipus Rex, and Harry Potter. As I was doing research for the episode, I read a really great quote from worldhistory.org. The message of the myth contained the truth, not the specific details of the story. It was universally accepted in the ancient world that the purpose of myths were to provide the audience with the truth, and it was up to the audience to interpret what was needed for their cultures. Okay, I know I just talked a lot, but let's recap what we just discussed. Myths are sacred tales, legends are about people or events in time that were changed to fit a narrative, fairy tales are stories that involve magical creatures and settings to teach morals, and folklore is the umbrella term for stories within a specific group of people. While there are some technical differences between them, they all have the same purpose, which is to preserve the lessons of the past to teach the generation of the future. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to comment down below what stories you want me to cover on here, or just in general what your favorite stories are. Join us next time as we turn the page to see what happens next on The Myth, The Legend, The Series. Goodbye!